The January blizzard descended on Maple Creek, Iowa, with a force that felt almost alive. By late afternoon, the snow had been falling for nearly 10 hours, covering the streets, cars, and rooftops in a thick white blanket. The National Weather Service had issued warnings since morning, urging residents to remain indoors, stock up on essentials, and avoid unnecessary travel. Most families had already retreated into the safety of their homes, gathering around fireplaces or huddling under blankets as the storm raged outside. The town, usually filled with the hum of traffic and the chatter of neighbors, had gone silent, its roads buried and its sidewalks erased by drifts as high as 4 feet. Temperatures had plummeted below zero, with a wind chill near -20. Each gust of wind howled through the empty streets like a living thing, rattling windows and bending the branches of leafless trees. Porch lights glowed faintly in the swirling snow, but their reach was quickly swallowed by the storm, leaving the landscape in an eerie twilight. Power flickered in some homes, and a few residents prayed silently that the old electrical lines could withstand another brutal night. For anyone caught outside, survival meant constant movement. The cold was merciless, sinking into bone and muscle within minutes. Frostbite could take hold before a person even realized what was happening. On the edge of town, near the deserted park where swings and slides stood frozen in ghostly stillness, the storm showed no mercy. The wind pushed relentlessly, piling snow against benches and burying the paths that children once ran across. This was not a night for anyone to be outside, not a night for any living creature to test the storm's fury. And yet, somewhere beyond the swirling white, a 6-month-old Labrador puppy was fighting for his life, his golden fur crusted with ice, each breath a painful cloud in the bitter air. He had no way of knowing that the storm would change his fate forever. Through the swirling snow staggered Max, a Labrador no older than 6 months. His fur, once golden and soft, was now clumped with ice, each step leaving faint streaks of red in the snow where his paw pads had cracked from the frozen ground. Hunger gnawed at him, his ribs faintly visible beneath the wet coat, but what drove him forward was not just the need for food. It was the instinct to survive, to find warmth somewhere in this endless white desert. Max had not always been alone. He had been born in a warm home with children who laughed when he tumbled across the carpet. But financial hardship had forced that family to surrender him to the local shelter, where for a short while it seemed like luck had turned in his favor. A second family adopted him, smiling as they clipped on a new collar and promised him a better life. Yet that promise quickly broke. They kept him outside most of the time, even on nights when the frost crept over the grass and meals came irregularly, if at all. 3 days ago, during a careless moment, the gate in their backyard swung open. Max slipped out, unnoticed at first, and when the snow began, the door to return had already closed. Now, with the storm pressing against him, Max trudged past the park where benches and swings lay buried. The wind stung his eyes, making them water, and he lowered his head, ears flattened tight against the gusts. Memories flickered through his tired mind. The warmth of his mother's fur, the sound of gentle voices, the comfort of a soft hand scratching behind his ears. Each memory cut deeper than the cold, reminding him of what he had lost. The streets were deserted, silent except for the roar of the storm. No footsteps, no voices, no hope of rescue, only the crunch of his own weary steps. His body shook with exhaustion, but still he moved forward, driven by some faint pull he could not explain. And then, just as his strength threatened to fail, a sound carried through the storm, thin, fragile, almost drowned by the wind. Max stopped, ears twitching, his heart quickening despite the cold. Max froze, his ears pricking through the howl of the storm. There it was again, a sound so faint it could have been mistaken for the wind, yet different enough to stir something deep inside him. A high-pitched mew, weak and desperate, carried from somewhere nearby. He turned his head toward the park bench, half buried beneath a heavy drift of snow. Forcing his stiff legs forward, he pushed his nose through the icy powder and caught the scent, sharp, faint, but alive. Beneath the bench sat a battered cardboard box, its edges sagging under the weight of damp snow. Inside, three tiny bodies lay huddled together. Two were already still, their fragile forms frozen by the cold, but one remained, a trembling kitten, no larger than a coffee mug, her fur soaked and matted. She let out another feeble mew, as if summoning the last of her strength to call for help. Her small body shivered violently, curled into a tight ball against the bitter night. Despite his own misery, Max's instincts took over. He nudged the box carefully, dragging it out from under the bench, then lowered his body beside the surviving kitten. His warmth was faint, but to the kitten it was everything. She pressed herself against his chest fur, her trembling easing just slightly as she burrowed deeper. Max curled his body around her as best he could, shielding her from the biting wind. His breath came in ragged clouds, yet he lowered his head to nudge her gently, as if to reassure her that she wasn't alone. The effort cost him dearly. His legs felt heavier with each passing minute, his paws burning and numb all at once. But the kitten's fragile heartbeat against his chest gave him reason to keep moving. He knew instinctively that staying there meant certain death for both of them. Summoning what little strength remained, Max shifted the kitten more securely against his body and pushed forward once again. Each step felt like dragging through mud, but her faint cries urged him on. Through the curtain of snow, he searched for any sign of shelter, any flicker of light that could lead them both away from the storm. With the kitten pressed against his chest, Max pushed himself onward into the storm. Each step sank deep into the snow, his paws raw and bleeding, but he refused to stop. The tiny creature's faint warmth against his fur was the only reminder that he was not alone in this fight. The park vanished behind him, swallowed by the blizzard, and the streets ahead stretched out like an endless maze of white. His body screamed for rest. More than once his legs buckled, sending him collapsing into the drift, but every time he felt the kitten stir weakly against him, he forced himself back up. The thought of leaving her to the storm never crossed his mind. The instinct to protect burned stronger than his exhaustion. He tucked his head low, ears flat against the gusts, and trudged forward with a determination that seemed far greater than his small, battered frame. Block by block, he moved through the ghostly town. Snow clung to porches and windows, icicles hanging like daggers from rooftops. Not a single human voice broke the silence, only the roar of the wind and the crunch of Max's weary steps. He passed a stop sign half buried in ice, a playground lost beneath drifts, and a row of houses with darkened windows. His vision blurred and the world tilted, but still he pressed on. Then, through the curtain of snow, a flicker of color caught his eye. A warm glow spilled from a window of a modest two-story house at the corner of Oakwood Street. It glimmered like a beacon, fragile but steady against the storm. Max's tail gave the faintest wag, though he had no strength left to lift it. That light meant warmth, and warmth meant survival for him, and more importantly, for the small heartbeat nestled against his chest. With the last of his energy, Max dragged himself toward the porch. The steps loomed like a mountain, each rise an impossible climb, but he dug his claws into the snow and hauled himself up, one trembling push at a time. At the top, he pressed against the door, body quivering, and finally collapsed with a dull thud, the kitten still safe within his embrace. Inside the modest two-story house on Oakwood Street, Jack Miller sat alone in his recliner, the crackling of the fireplace the only sound breaking the silence. At 63, the retired firefighter carried a lifetime of rescues behind him, yet his present days felt heavier than any fire he had ever fought. 2 winters earlier, his wife Linda had passed after a brief but fierce battle with cancer, and since then the house had felt more like a shell than a home. His grown children, busy with lives on opposite coasts, called often but visited rarely. The holidays had been especially hollow, the cheerful lights around town only reminding him of what he had lost. He pulled his old cardigan tighter, the storm rattling the windows as he stared at the fire, lost in memory. He thought of nights long ago when his crew braved storms like this one to pull families from stranded cars, the adrenaline and relief of saving lives giving him purpose. Retirement had taken away that urgency, leaving him with too much quiet, too many hours to sit with his grief. Then he heard it, a faint thud, almost swallowed by the wind. Jack straightened, his instincts sharpening the way they used to on duty. He listened. There it was again, followed by the faintest scratching against the door. Rising slowly but with purpose, he walked toward the entryway, the floor creaking under his steps. A surge of caution struck him. Living alone had taught him to be careful about opening the door at night. He flipped on the porch light and leaned toward the peephole, but the angle revealed nothing but swirling snow. His gut, the same one that had once saved him and others countless times, told him this was more than the wind. Against better judgment, but guided by instinct, he turned the knob and pulled the door open. The sight stopped him cold. A young Labrador lay collapsed on the porch, his body coated in snow and ice, steam faintly rising from his labored breaths. Against the dog's chest, tucked tightly beneath his frozen fur, was a tiny kitten barely moving. Jack's eyes widened as his years of training snapped into focus. "Oh dear God," he whispered, already kneeling, already reaching, the firefighter in him pushing aside hesitation. What lay before him was not just a dog and a kitten, it was a plea for help, and Jack knew there was no time to waste. Jack scooped both animals into his arms, careful not to separate them when he noticed how the puppy instinctively curled tighter around the kitten. The cold hit him like a wall as the door stood open, but he turned quickly, shutting out the storm behind him. He moved straight to the living room, his firefighter instincts firing on every cylinder. Years ago, it had been people trapped in flames or pulled from wrecked cars. Tonight it was a dog and a kitten, but the urgency felt the same. He cleared the coffee table with one sweep of his arm, setting the two fragile bodies onto a spread of towels he yanked from the linen closet. The Labrador barely stirred, his chest rising in shallow, uneven breaths. The kitten was worse, limp, barely giving a sound, her tiny sides fluttering as though each breath might be her last. "Not tonight," Jack muttered under his breath, his voice low but firm, as if speaking to fellow firefighters on a dangerous call. He fetched his old heating pad from the hallway closet, wrapping it carefully in a towel to keep from burning their skin, then layered blankets over the pair. The dog let out a faint whine when Jack tried to shift the kitten, so Jack gave up on moving her separately and kept them pressed together. Their bond, fragile as it was, might be the only reason they had survived the storm this far. Minutes crawled into an hour as Jack worked tirelessly. He rubbed their limbs gently to coax circulation, swapped out damp towels for dry ones, even used his own body heat by tucking the kitten beneath his cardigan when her trembling grew weaker. At one terrifying moment, the puppy's chest seemed to stop. Jack pressed both hands against the small rib cage, rubbing vigorously, whispering encouragements he hadn't spoken in years. "Come on, buddies, stay with me." The faint rise of breath that followed nearly made him collapse with relief. As the night dragged on, the fire in the hearth cast warm light across the room, and Jack kept talking, if only to fill the silence. He told them about Linda, about the emptiness that had lingered since she passed, about the days that stretched too long. The Labrador, though weak, lifted his eyes and watched, tail thumping faintly against the towel as if he understood. And for the first time in years, Jack felt he wasn't completely alone. By dawn, the blizzard had loosened its grip on Maple Creek. The storm clouds broke into pale streaks of light, and the world outside Jack's window had transformed into a silent, endless field of white. Snow clung to the trees like heavy lace, the streets buried so deep that only rooftops and chimneys peeked above the drifts. For the first time in hours, the air inside his home felt still, not frantic, as though the house itself understood the worst had passed. Jack crouched beside the coffee table where the animals lay bundled in blankets. The Labrador stirred weakly, lifting his head just enough to look around before settling back down. The kitten gave a faint mew, her voice thin but alive, and stretched her tiny paw across the dog's fur as if unwilling to let go. Jack let out a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Against all odds, they had both made it through the night. He reached for the phone and dialed the number of Dr. Emily Carter, the town's veterinarian and an old acquaintance who had treated Linda's cats years ago. To his surprise, she answered even at such an early hour, her tone alert the moment he described the situation. "Don't move them too much," she instructed. "Keep them warm. I'll head out as soon as the plow's clear enough of the road." True to her word, by late morning, her SUV crunched into Jack's driveway, tires fighting against the packed snow. Inside, she listened carefully as Jack explained the rescue, then began her examination with practiced efficiency. "Severe hypothermia," she murmured, checking the Labrador's paw pads, "but you've done well, he'll recover. Some minor frostbite here." The kitten, she paused, holding the trembling ball of fur against her chest. "She's very lucky. Another hour and she wouldn't have survived." Jack exhaled slowly, relief mixing with awe. Dr. Carter then pulled out a scanner, passing it gently over the dog's shoulder. A sharp beep filled the room. "He's chipped," she said, glancing at Jack. "I'll check the database back at the clinic." The words hit Jack like a sudden draft of cold air. Of course, the puppy might already belong to someone. As much as his heart resisted, he nodded. It was the right thing to do. Still, as he watched the dog nuzzle closer to the kitten, Jack felt something inside him tighten, an unexpected pang he hadn't felt in years, fear of losing them. That afternoon, after returning to her clinic, Dr. Carter called Jack with the results. His name was listed as Max, she explained. He was adopted from the shelter a couple of months ago, but his new owners reported him missing 3 days back. When I spoke with them, well, they admitted they'd been keeping him outside most of the time, even during the storm. They said maybe he'd be better off somewhere else. Her voice carried a mix of disapproval and resignation. "They've already signed the surrender papers." Jack felt a strange wave wash over him, relief tangled with quiet anger. Relief that the dog wouldn't be forced back into neglect, anger that anyone could treat such a young creature with so little care. He looked down at the puppy, now sleeping beside the kitten on the blanket, and saw how Max instinctively curled around her, even in his weakened state. The bond between them was undeniable, fragile yet fierce. "And the kitten?" Jack asked. "She's feral," Dr. Carter said. "No chip, no records. Likely born to a stray mother that didn't survive the storm. She has no one." Jack's eyes softened as he stroked the kitten's tiny head. She let out a small squeak, pressing closer to Max's chest as if answering his touch. For the first time in years, Jack felt something stir inside him, a sense of purpose he thought had died with Linda. He hesitated only a moment before speaking, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Then I'll take them, both of them. I don't want them separated." There was silence on the line, then Dr. Carter's voice warmed. "I think that's the best decision you've made in a long time, Jack." When he hung up, Jack leaned back in his chair, watching the two small lives that had stumbled into his home. His wife's words, whispered on her last night, returned to him with surprising clarity. "Promise me you won't live alone forever." For months, he had pushed those words aside, unwilling to open his heart again. But now, sitting by the fire with Max and the kitten, Lily, he decided, a name that fit her delicate persistence. He realized Linda had been right. News of Jack's new companions reached his children within a week. Emily, his daughter living in Boston, was the first to call. Her voice came through the phone, half curious, half concerned. "Dad, I heard you've taken in a dog and a kitten." "Is that true?" Jack chuckled softly, glancing at Max sprawled across the rug while Lily batted at his tail. "It's true. They didn't exactly ask for permission, Em. They showed up at my door during the blizzard. I didn't have much choice." Emily hesitated, her tone softening. "I just worry you've been through so much and animals, well, they're a big responsibility." "I know," Jack said gently, "but they've already changed the house. It doesn't feel so empty anymore, and honestly, they've changed me too." A few days later, his son Michael called from Seattle. His approach was more direct. Dad, are you sure this is a good idea? You've been alone for years. Taking care of pets, it's not easy. What if it's too much? Jack leaned back in his chair, watching Lily curl up in his lap while Max laid his head across Jack's feet. He thought about Linda's words, about the night he'd nearly lost both animals, about the spark of life they had brought back into his quiet days. Michael, he said finally, for the first time since your mother passed, I feel like I'm not just existing. I'm living again. If you could see them here, you'd understand. Silence lingered, then Michael sighed. If they make you happy, Dad, then I guess I'm glad you found them. Weeks later, when Emily managed a visit, she was stunned. The man who had seemed worn and distant on video calls now laughed as Lily climbed his shoulder and Max bounded through the snow in the backyard. That evening, as they sat together by the fire, Emily whispered, I haven't seen you this alive in years. Jack stroked Max's fur, smiling faintly. Neither have I. It didn't take long for word of Jack's rescue to ripple through Maple Creek. At first, it was just the neighbors on Oakwood Street. One afternoon, Mrs. Harris from across the road knocked on his door, carrying a basket of muffins. I read about you in the Gazette, she said, nodding toward Max, who sat politely by the doorway with Lily perched proudly on his back. You've given this town a story worth talking about. The Maple Creek Gazette had published the article with a front-page headline. Retired firefighter rescues puppy and kitten in blizzard. The photo, Jack sitting by the fire with Max at his feet and Lily curled in his lap, captured the heart of the town. Soon, children stopped by after school, eager to meet the hero dog and the tiny kitten he'd saved. Max wagged his tail as though he understood his role, while Lily accepted their attention with regal patience. But the story reached beyond Jack's street. A teacher from the elementary school invited Jack to bring Max and Lily to a classroom, hoping their survival tale might teach the students about kindness and responsibility. The visit became a highlight of the winter term. The children listened wide-eyed as Jack described the night of the storm, and Max soaked up their affection while Lily perched like a queen on Jack's shoulder. Later, the director of the local nursing home extended a similar invitation. Jack hesitated at first. He hadn't walked into such a place since Linda's final days, but something in him urged him to go. That afternoon, as residents stroked Max's soft fur and Lily purred in their laps, Jack watched their faces light up. The animals carried with them not just warmth but hope, a reminder that second chances could heal even the deepest loneliness. Each outing left Jack a little more connected, a little less isolated. Neighbors who had once only waved politely from a distance now lingered for conversation. Retirees stopped by his garden to sit on the bench he'd placed there, sharing stories while Max dozed nearby and Lily chased butterflies. For the first time in years, Jack's house no longer felt like a monument to what he had lost. It had become a gathering place, filled with laughter, life, and belonging. Life with Max and Lily quickly settled into a rhythm that Jack hadn't realized he missed. Each morning, Max padded down the hallway to nudge open his bedroom door, tail wagging like a metronome, insisting it was time to get up. On more than one occasion, Lily leapt onto the bed first, meowing sharply as if scolding him for sleeping too late. Jack couldn't help but laugh, pulling the blanket aside as both animals scrambled for space beside him. Meals became their own comedy show. While Jack prepared his oatmeal, Max sat dutifully near the kitchen table, pretending to be the picture of patience. Yet the moment Jack's back turned, Lily made her move tiny paws, reaching up to swipe at the spoon or dip into his bowl. Once, she managed to topple a half-empty glass of milk, sending it spilling across the counter. Max immediately rushed to lick it up, only for his tail to sweep another cup onto the floor. Jack stood frozen for a beat before bursting out laughing, a sound that echoed through the house with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. Evenings by the fire held their own kind of charm. Lily often curled into Jack's lap, stretching like she owned the recliner, while Max sprawled across the rug with his head resting on Jack's slippers. Sometimes, when Jack leaned down to scratch Max's ears, Lily would swat at the dog's tail as it thumped lazily, starting a playful exchange that ended with the kitten perched triumphantly on Max's back. Jack shook his head at their antics. "You two are a circus act," he'd mutter, but his grin gave him away. These small moments stitched themselves into his days, subtle but powerful. Where silence had once weighed heavily, laughter now slipped easily from his lips. The memories of Linda still lingered, her voice, her presence, but the sharp edges of grief softened each time he found himself smiling at Max's goofy loyalty or Lily's fearless mischief. For the first time in a long while, Jack's house felt alive again. One cool spring evening, months after the blizzard, Jack sat in his garden tending to the daisies he had planted in Linda's memory. Lily prowled along the stone path, her tail flicking with the confidence of a queen surveying her kingdom, while Max lay stretched in the grass, head on his paws, watching the world with calm brown eyes. The peace of the moment reminded Jack just how far they had all come since that stormy night. Then, without warning, Max's ears shot up. He leapt to his feet, nose twitching, and let out a sharp bark. Jack straightened, startled, as Max bolted toward the edge of the yard, where a metal drain pipe jutted from beneath the fence. Lily paused mid-step, tilting her head curiously as Max pawed at the pipe, barking louder this time. Jack hurried over, heart quickening. From inside the pipe came a faint sound, thin, muffled, desperate. He dropped to his knees, pressing his ear close, and heard it clearly now. A kitten's cry nearly identical to the sound that had first brought Max to Lily months earlier. "Good boy," Jack murmured, his voice tight with urgency. He pulled on gloves from the shed and worked quickly, unscrewing the grate that covered the opening. As soon as the gap widened, Max shoved his nose inside, whining, his tail wagging furiously. Jack reached in and carefully pulled out a tiny black and white kitten, soaked and shivering, its paws scraped raw from trying to claw free. Jack cradled the kitten against his chest, feeling its fragile heartbeat. He glanced at Max, who stood close, eyes locked on the bundle in his arms, tail sweeping the ground with pride. Lily, from her perch on the garden bench, gave a disapproving meow as if to say, "One of me was enough." Jack chuckled, shaking his head. "Looks like you're not done being a rescuer, are you, Max?" As he carried the new arrival inside, Jack couldn't help but feel the echo of that blizzard night. Fate had chosen once more to place a life in their path, and Max had answered without hesitation. It was a reminder that some instincts never fade, and that perhaps this little family was destined to keep growing in unexpected ways. Summer came to Maple Creek, and the garden behind Jack's house bloomed with daisies, roses, and lilies swaying in the warm breeze. What had once been a quiet yard of fading memories had turned into a place of laughter and renewal. Jack often sat on the bench he had placed in Linda's honor, watching Max chase butterflies across the lawn while Lily surveyed the world from her favorite perch on the porch rail. The newest addition, the kitten rescued from the drain pipe, had found her place too, often tumbling clumsily after Max's wagging tail, while Lily pretended not to be impressed. The story of that fateful winter night had long since traveled through town. Neighbors still stopped by to share it with newcomers. Teachers retold it in classrooms, and the Gazette followed up with another feature, From Blizzard to Bloom. How a dog, a cat, and a retired firefighter built a family. People saw in Jack's home not just survival, but the proof that compassion could heal grief, that even in the coldest winters of life, warmth could return. Jack himself felt the difference most of all. The ache of loneliness had not disappeared. He still missed Linda every day, but the weight was no longer unbearable. He had found purpose again, not in rushing toward flames as he once had, but in caring for the fragile lives that fate had placed at his door. Watching Max and Lily curled together by the fireplace, he often thought about how easily that night could have gone differently. If he hadn't heard the thud, if he hadn't opened the door, 3 lives might have ended in silence. Instead, a family had begun. On the anniversary of the storm, Jack invited neighbors and friends to the garden. They gathered beneath the warm glow of lanterns, sharing food and stories while Max greeted each guest and Lily claimed her spot in the center of attention. Jack raised a glass and said quietly, "Sometimes family doesn't find you in the ways you expect. Sometimes it knocks on your door in the middle of a storm. I'm grateful I opened mine." If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories of hope, second chances, and the unbreakable bond between people and animals.